Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Elliot.
How is it going? Is this Ryan?
Yeah, how you doing?
Wonderfully. How are you?
Good, good. Sorry we don't have camera. We're just kind of waiting for a few more minutes here. And
Take
then we'll...
time.
I think so, yeah. Can you go ahead and talk for us one more time, Elliot?
I certainly can. How's the audio over there?
Wait, hold on.
Hang on one second. We're just gonna fix
Switch
something.
the audio from
Keep talking. You just
make
let me
it
know when
nice.
things are working well,
headphones. There you go. One more time.
or if things aren't working, you just keep letting me know.
Headphones. That should be good.
Yeah, it's low. We need that. We can hear it.
Perfect. Tell me if things are working or if they aren't working.
Go ahead again.
Perfect. How's this? How can you hear me?
Starting to come through. Hang on, we're just turning it up.
Excellent, excellent. Yep, things could be.
That's good. I think we're good, right? One more time, Elliot.
One more time. Mic check.
All right.
1, 2.
Beautiful.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Hang on one second.
Good time.
Let me see if I can let's just share here. I am just going to share my screen to start, and then we'll switch over to yours. You have a like a PowerPoint to right? Okay.
I do.
Let me just make sure that so let me just line up real quick. Yeah, sure. Yeah, no problem. Right. All right. Sounds good. Can you see that, Elliot?
I certainly can. Yep.
All right, great. All right. We're just giving a few more minutes. Thanks for doing this. We really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people about Chat GPT and AI in general. And I'll reveal more later, but my wife is a doctor, so it's something I think about a lot.
It's definitely relevant then.
Seriously. Who all is on the other end of the line?
So we have a conference room here. So it's myself. We have Mitchell here, who's the vice chair of the TTI committee. We have Ashley, and is that Katie? Ashley and Katie, there are medical student liaisons. And then it's going to be recorded and distributed to basically anyone who wants to see it, who's part of the Emergency Medicine Resident Association. So it'll be up and available for them to review. And then as people kind of like filter in, if they're interested in this topic, then, and I know there'll be a few people that are coming in, they're going to watch it live as well.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, you let me know when you want me to start going.
Sounds good. We'll wait like 2 more minutes and then we'll just get going.
Perfect. Show of hands in the room. Sound like we got, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 people. Who has an account with Chat GPT or OpenAI already?
It looks like everybody does. Chat GPT, do you have an account? Yeah, I think everybody does. Yeah.
Amazing. Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Does anyone have Chat GPT Plus accounts?
I've not purchased that. It's a purchase, right? You have to pay for it. Yeah.
That you do. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have a paid version, so we can play with that today.
Oh, cool. All right.
So that should be fun. I got access to the new model, so that should be pretty sweet. Definitely does some interesting and different stuff.
Sounds great.
Caesar's Resort should be the only one that does not require this.
We're just working out some internet stuff real quick.
Always, never easy.
Okay, for sure. I will, because there's one house right now, but he knows probably the fastest to use it. Yeah, no, when I see him, I'll get a better.
Oh,
I can see it.
Also, do you have?
If you
do
wanna
have the
sit over there.
presentation up too?
so I have a presentation right now, and then we're gonna switch, and Elliot's gonna pull up. a
Okay, I was
presentation.
just curious, but I just want to test.
Yeah.
it. Like a-
Oh, yeah, sure, I can. Isn't it, it's just,
just, forward and back. That's about it. Awesome.
all right, cool.
All right, so if, just the corruption Wi-Fi thing in the check. Need anything?
I think we're good for now, yeah.
Okay, can I see my guy? Bring him in here. See what he can do.
All right, sounds good. All right, I think we might as well get started. Let me just make sure Cedra is, oh, hold on a second. I need to let some people in the meeting apparently that I did not. Let me just share. All right.
Hey,
All
Cedra.
right. Hey, Cedra.
Hi guys.
Yeah, I
So
think we're
glad
good.
you could come, Elliot. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Are you sure?
Like, why?
They're just working on some sound stuff, sorry.
No worries.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, good.
Hi, Valerie. I'm one of the
Nice to
members.
meet you. Oh, thanks.
We're hoping for everyone to just scan the QR code so that we can sign in and send thank you notes later.
Sure.
So everyone.
Sounds
You don't
good.
mind.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
You guys get it as well. All right, so there may be some changes in sound as we go along. May get worse, may get better. We'll find out. But I think for the time being, we might as well just get this rolling. So just some quick things. Just wanted to thank the EMRA TTI committee, and if I miss anybody's name, I apologize, but this is who I know and have met so far. We have our current chair, Nico Call. I'm the chair-elect, and then our vice chairs, Cedra Speaker and Mitch Blendon. And then we have our EMRA board liaison, who's Amanda Irish, and our medical student liaisons who are here, Ashley and Katie. So thank all of you guys for joining and helping out. No disclosures on my end. And just a real brief introduction of who Elliot is. And Elliot, you can fill us in because to be honest with you, a lot of this stuff just went over my head, but it all sounds really fancy and great and really smart. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you and learning about it. But it sounds like you're an entrepreneur, founding software engineer. You have your own company called Topline, which you can probably certainly explain better than I. And you're former Google Cloud software engineer. It sounds like you've had multiple different software engineering jobs, building products and helping companies. And it sounds like you do some great mentor work as well. And have even built some social networking apps. So you have done a lot in the programming world, and a lot of testing, a lot of building, a lot of startups. And so I just think Cedra, when she mentioned your background and your experiences and what you do, it just seemed like a perfect fit to basically just educate us on the Chat GPT topic and these large language models and how they may be able to help medicine. And so I'm going to kind of leave it to you to kind of take us through this now. And again, we really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for
I'm
the
going to stop sharing so you can open up yours.
Perfect. Yeah, if you stop, I will take over from there. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely my pleasure. I'm interested in healthcare. My wife is a doctor. And I actually know on there we go. Perfect. All right. So can everyone see my screen all right?
We can see. Looks great.
Perfect. And everyone can hear me loud and clear?
Yeah.
Excellent. So I really appreciate the introduction. I have done a lot of different things in technology. I would kind of consider myself a general technologist. I was trained in mechanical engineering. I now focus on software engineering, but I build electronics engineering stuff in my spare time and read articles on papers on things like Chat GPT pretty frequently. So definitely when Cedro approached me with the opportunity to talk about it, I was super excited. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. So just to start things off, I have no disclosures of my own, at least none financial. I am not a medical professional. My wife is a doctor, but I am not one. And I do not have a degree in machine learning or AI. Just want to get that out of the way. But I am a software engineer. I'm very interested in new technology. I've studied in my line of work how language models and machine learning and AI works, and I like to keep myself up to date on that. Like you said, I used to work at Google. I worked on their cloud data pipelines, interpreting information and making sure it stayed private. So that was kind of what I did over at Google. Currently, I run Topline. We're a financial tech company. We integrate with small businesses to help them understand their revenue and actually grow faster with applied capital. We actually sometimes consider using language models and other types of machine learning models to better understand and underwrite companies. So it's something that applies to me, not just as an interest, but also professionally. Today, what we're going to cover is first general topics on machine learning. So what is machine learning as an entire field? And then I want to dive into Chat GPT itself. And I'm actually going to show you some demos. It sounds like a lot of people here have accounts, which is really wonderful. That's kind of the biggest takeaway I want to give you guys is do it yourself. You've got to be practicing with these tools because no one really knows exactly how to use them. And sort of like a spreadsheet or a calculator, it's hard to understand why you would use that tool until you've used it a bunch. And if you guys have any questions during, please don't hesitate to speak up. But if I don't see anyone or hear anything, I'm just going to keep on rolling.
I'll let you know if there's any questions from the group. Okay.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you. So what is machine learning? Machine learning is the process of creating software that makes predictions or takes actions based on statistical patterns in training data. It is not like other software where you give it explicit pre-written instructions or algorithms. So typically there's a training process that takes lots and lots of data and time and energy to produce a model. And so what makes machine learning cool is that you can take data that already exists out in the world or data that you create yourself and apply this time and energy. And that's sort of what machine learning engineers do to create this model. Creating the model could take hundreds of machine years to do, but if you spread that over a bunch of different machines, you can actually get it done in something like an afternoon. And what it outputs is a model that you can use very quickly, on the order of milliseconds. So that way you can take all of these patterns that you recognize and facilitate them into this tool that can take advantage of those patterns however you see fit. We can use things like machine learning to do some interesting stuff. One of the earliest applications of machine learning in healthcare was radiology. Machine learning is particularly good at understanding what images are. And so radiologists were able to use machine learning to detect breast cancer. And why that's really cool is because then you don't need to spend quite so much time yourself looking at it, or you can have a backup looking at all of the imaging that you as a radiologist might be looking at and get better inferences or a second set of eyes on something that can act really quickly. In other fields, high frequency traders, they take stock data, huge amounts of stock data, and use it to make predictions about where things are going in their future to get profit off of it. Google uses machine learning in a whole bunch of places, but one that you're probably pretty familiar with is search. When you search for a term, what Google does is takes a whole bunch of different ways that people interact with the internet, and they decide based on this query, what pattern should I follow when delivering results? to give the result that the user is most likely to get value out of. Now you notice that things are pretty vague in that aspect. Getting value out of something and user behavior are gigantic data sets, and it's up to Google engineers to figure out how to turn those data sets into a model that actually produces results that people like. An even more complex example is understanding traffic patterns for self-driving cars. Every time you see those cars driving by with the spinners on top, what they're doing is getting giant video, huge data sets of video that they can use to train their cars to drive better. And so all of these applications have in common a gigantic labeled data set. And that's the hardest part about machine learning as an entire field, is that you need to get huge, like these petabytes of data to get any sort of useful result. The radiologists probably had it the hardest here because they need every single person or every single radiology scan to be labeled as whether it's positive or negative. You probably need someone to label where in the image they might find any breast cancer. And then even further, the way you label it might have to be the same. So there's a lot of work that goes into finding data sets that are big enough and consistent enough for their labeling that they can actually be useful for your model. And oftentimes that collection process is actually multi-step. First you collect it, and then you might have a person or a team of humans go in and label the data correctly. And unfortunately, things can go wrong in that process. You can have shortcomings in the way you collect the data. So if that team of people who are labeling things have a bias, then you're going to end up having a biased outcome. If you are only getting, if you think about the radiation example again, if you're only looking at scans from a certain population, consciously or not, if the hospitals who are giving you that data don't generalize to the entire population, maybe they're hospitals that only represent certain demographics, then the model that interprets them is only going to be representative of those demographics. And it's really hard to understand as perhaps a user of the tools that someone else who trained the model is giving you something that won't work for certain people. You, the user, might not have biases, but if the trainers have biases, or if the trainers, people who got the data set have biases, that's going to show up for the users of the model. Another bad thing is that models are black boxes. It's really hard to understand what is going on inside of the model. You could ask a triage nurse perhaps, hey, why did you give this person a level 3? And they might point to steps on an algorithm that they found when they were discussing with the person why that led to a level 3. Or maybe they'll say, hey, they were breathing just fine and they looked within this range, so I can say why I gave my level 3. When you ask a model about it, if you create a machine learning model, you can't ask it questions about why it made decisions. And that can be really problematic for auditing or for legal reasons. And it's not just a matter of, hey, it would require someone else outside who wrote the code to make that decision. It's really that models have if you have a billion parameter model, it's just a billion numbers making these decisions. So you really do not know how all of your decisions are originating if you're using machine learning. And the last thing is garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad training data, you aren't going to get good results. If your training data isn't labeled correctly, you aren't going to get good results. If you don't have enough training data, then you're going to end up with results that are typically some overfitted to the results that you do have. So if you have data where, for example, a certain community provided their radiology scans, and their scans happen to have a little white blip in the top right corner from the scanner, but that community had more instances of breast cancer, instead of the model, trying to associate, yes, these images actually have nodes in the breasts, you're actually going to find that, oh, this little blip in the top right indicates a 5% higher chance in cancer, which of course is not what you want, but it's what the model is going to tell you because it doesn't know the context. So really, it is up to the trainers of the model to create that context. I realize that as doctors, you guys might not be the ones training it firsthand, but you may find yourself in an opportunity if you're working on a project to create a model, considering how you feed it that data. The team that builds the model is probably going to ask you to collect data, and it's up to you to make sure you have a complete data set. With that, I want to jump into a really cool application of machine learning in general, which is language models. Language models are a type of machine learning model that are used to predict the probability of a sequence of words or characters in a language. It uses statistical techniques to learn patterns in large data sets of text, and it can generate or complete sentences that are coherent and grammatically correct. Language models are just the same as other sort of general machine learning models, except for they are trained on text. And the really cool thing about text is that text is pretty close to how humans think. I don't know if you guys have a voice in your head, but the text that we write down on the page is a lot closer to the voice in our head than tabular radiation scans. And of course, we think about things in a lot of different ways. We do think in images and audio and smells and text, but the way humanity as a whole has transferred its knowledge from one person to the next is mostly in text. And you guys have seen language models before. Every time you use Google, that autocomplete that takes the first few words or characters you've typed and tries to guess what the next ones are coming, that is a language model. It's trying to complete the sentence. Similarly, iOS and Apple released a feature on iPhones where if you start typing a few words, the next 3 options that it thinks are best will come up next. So when you think of a language model, this is the simplest version that there is. It really just is a complete the sentence. And now completing the sentence on its own isn't that cool. It's not arising the features that you might think that Chat GPT can do, things that can start making decisions or start picking up patterns all over the place. But it turns out the hundreds of thousands, actually a few million parameters of the model that the iPhone has on your iPhone is not that big compared to Chat GPT, which the 3rd version, GPT-3, has 175 billion parameters. So just absolutely massive orders of magnitude different in the size of the model. And it turns out a bigger language model can hold bigger ideas. And it can figure out things that connect from other parts of the passage, other words in the phrase that it is going to use to complete the text and make a more sensical answer for what comes next. But keep in mind that all this is doing under the hood is figuring out what comes next. And I cannot stress this enough. While they appear intelligent, large language models are just predicting the best word to come next. They are not intelligent. They don't have artificial intelligence. Machine learning is generally the industry term for what marketing calls artificial intelligence, AI. Machine learning concerns itself on usefulness. It thinks about how is the application being served? How can we create a tool that someone would want to use? Whereas AI is much more focused on, is this thing smarter than a human? And if there's one thing I want to impress upon you, it's that replacing humans might be interesting and it might have interesting political implications, but it's a secondary, if it's a goal at all, it should be secondary to creating useful applications. So when you think about ChatGPT, try not to think about it in a way that is replacing people or saying, this is as smart as X. Think about it, I could use this for Y. So again, not intelligent, just filling in the next word, but it can do a really amazing job at figuring out what word should come next. And with that, Chat GPT, the moment we've all been waiting for. Chat GPT is a web interface on top of GPT-3, which is the largest language model ever made up until a couple months ago when they made GPT-4. So Chat GPT is a web UI. You can interact with it. Sounds like you guys all have accounts. Bravo. You can use it for free. You can pay 20 bucks a month to get the advanced version so that when it goes down, like it did this morning, you get to be the first one to know when it comes back up. But it is just a very, very, very large language model. It was trained on the entire internet, or at least the entire internet as the company OpenAI, which is the publishers of GPT-3 and ChatGPT, decided to use. So when you think about a language model, a thing that completes the text based on text trained from the entire internet, that is what you're getting with ChatGPT. When you're asking it queries, it is deciding based on all of the text I've read from the entirety of the internet as selected by OpenAI, what do I think are the best words that should come next? That is the core of ChatGPT. How should the internet complete this sentence? So there are a few major drawbacks that I see there. The first is you're asking the internet. when your patients come to you, someone comes into the emergency room and they say, hey, I read on WebMD, my cousin told me X, there was a Facebook post Y. Do you trust that information? Because that's the information that Chat GPT was trained on. So that's one big issue. The second thing is that it's OpenAI's view of what the internet is. They didn't take literally every article out there. They picked which ones they thought were correct. Now, that probably is better than everything, but they haven't published what that data set is. So you as a medical professional might be beholden to articles that Chat GPT picked. Maybe they picked an article from an untrustworthy source and you wouldn't know that. So until OpenAI is a little bit more open about the data set they use to train, you should always be cautious about what data comes out of Chat GPT. But all that said, I want to give you guys some examples. So
We just have a question real quick, if you don't mind us interrupting you. Someone has a question.
So you talked a little bit about like ChatGPT kind of taking maybe some sources that are maybe not the most reputable. I was using it to kind of like play around a couple of weeks ago, whatever it was. And I gave it like a prompt, essentially like a patient prompt, and it got the answer right. But then I asked for its sources and it cited studies that like were non-existent. How is it pulling those in? Where is it kind of like making that stuff up from? Because it gave me, when this particular example that I asked it for was just like a young girl with like chest pain. And essentially I was trying to see if it would like pull out like the diagnosis that we always look for in the emergency room, or what the most likely diagnosis is. And it pulled out the most likely, and it cited 4 sources. One was like a real source, and then 3 of them were completely made up. I could not find them anywhere on the web. And I was just kind of curious, like, where is it pulling these like fake sources from?
So that's a great question. And you should consider what it is pulling from in general. ChatGPT does not actually have access to the internet. So what it's thinking of is, what are the most likely words to come next? So when it looks at a paper or it makes inferences, it thinks based on this context, sorry, thinks is not the right word. Based on the context, the model is going to come up with something that looks like a citation. That usually starts with https:// and it'll probably pick a university website or ArchiveX, some way that papers are published. And then it's going to put some characters after it that look like a web URL, because all it's doing is picking the best words that look correct afterwards. It doesn't actually know that there's a website to go reach out to. In fact, it is known to make up links, and it'll give them to you very confidently, because that's what it would look like to cite something. There's no checking the internet to see, yes, this is where I found this source. It just is saying, oh, they're looking for links. Let me give him something that looks like a link. So that's kind of one of the big problems with AI, is that it will present information confidently when it actually has no backing for that confidence. And it doesn't have a way to audit itself to know, I'm this % sure that this word should come next, or that this even exists, because its job is to just come up with the next word, not necessarily do research for you. Excellent question. Anything else you're curious about there?
No, that was it. Thanks.
Cool. So can you guys see my screen with GPT on it?
Yes.
Perfect. So I've got access to Chat GPT Plus. It should be a little bit faster than what you're seeing, but the model we're looking at is GPT 3.5, the same one that everyone should have access to. And I'm going to show you some examples that I've come up with. And then in the Q&A session, we can definitely go through more examples, because I'm super curious to see what you guys are interested in. But to start out, ChatGPT can be used to do simple stuff like lookups. So I'm asking it for the differential diagnosis for chest pain in an adult. And all of these examples came from what my wife thought of. So kudos to her for that. I'll give you a second to take a read through this. You don't need to read through the whole thing. But if you were to ask a medical student for the differential diagnosis of chest pain, this would be, I assume, a pretty good differential diagnosis. And if you look at the bottom, though, you're getting this note right here. It is important to seek medical attention if you're experiencing chest pain, as some causes can be life-threatening. So one thing I want to point out is that you are the medical attention. It would be weird for, it's for perhaps this to send for this message to go to one of your patients because they already are seeking medical attention. OpenAI has trained the model to put in things like guardrails so that OpenAI isn't responsible for people using it for stupid stuff. They don't want to be the ones who said, hey, you have chest pain, go ahead. They actually want to go the step further and say, hey, I'm just an AI model. You are responsible for your own safety. And you'll see that coming up a bunch. The model doesn't want to take responsibility for things because it is not smart. It is just predicting words. I'm going to start a new chat because one great feature about OpenAI or about Chat GPT is that every time you make a query, it actually takes the rest of your conversation with the chatbot and includes it in that query. And I don't want to include previous queries and new queries. So I'm going to start a new one. Another use that I use Chat GPT for a lot is actually first drafts of creative work. So say I wanted to make a presentation on Chat GPT to a conference of emergency medicine doctors, it can give me an outline. I imagine that a lot of you have work that isn't necessarily emergency medicine related, but it might be emails, presentations, speeches, cover letters, summarization work, things that require you to write something. And it's really helpful to edit a first draft that someone else wrote instead of starting from scratch. Sometimes I'm not a great writer. I could use someone to just figure this out, or perhaps you can copy and paste someone's entire LinkedIn page, say, hey, here's someone's LinkedIn page, write them a letter, asking them to apply to a job here. You can ask it to do a little bit more creative work. You can tell it to, hey, create a table comparing CT scans, MRIs, X-rays as the rows, and then cost, speed, and safety as the columns. So here, it's actually going to create a table for us. And it can infer from what we told it the rows and columns should be that it actually, what the values should be. I actually, off the top of my head, because I'm not a doctor, do not know if this is correct, but it's something a tool that you could use to make a table for a patient, make a table for yourself, create something for a student where, hey, I just want this value. I want it formatted in a certain way. And then you can give that to someone. So it's helpful for simple things like formatting, where if I were to try to create this table, it would have definitely taken me longer to create this in something like Excel and sent to a student or a patient. You can use it for summary work. So let's say I have an article that I want to summarize, and I'm going to go ahead and grab the article right here. And I'm just going to, copy the entire text right here. And I'm just going to plop it in Chat GPT. Someone sent me this article. I don't have time to read it. So I'm just going to pop the article in here. Notice I asked it for a summary in 2 sentences. We'll see if it follows through here. Hey, did pretty good.
I'd believe it.
So it's a pretty bland summary, but it's a summary nonetheless. It's going to be a time saver for things where I would not have read the article in the first place because I don't have time to read the whole thing and develop a summary for myself. But maybe I do want to get the gist of it. It is wonderful at summary work. And you can actually, I encourage you to try it for summary work and then read the article you had to make sure that, hey, yeah, this actually lines up, so you can start trusting it more here. But summary work is a wonderful way to use this tool. Now I want to dive into patient application, how I think you might be able to work with Chat GPT in a more of a work setting. We're going to pretend that we are a trauma nurse today. And instead of doing our job with our brains, we're going to let Chat GPT do it. So first and foremost, a patient came into the emergency department complaining of chest pain. I got to figure out what to do. And Chat GPT does not want to help me. As an animal language model, they are not qualified to provide medical advice or diagnosis. Now, they give us some things that are serious. They tell us this is bad. But then the guardrails come up again. OpenAI does not want to be responsible for this. They say, go seek medical attention. We are the medical attention. So there's sort of this interesting dichotomy of what we want the application to do, which is tell us how to handle this patient, but it doesn't have the context. They say medical professionals are needed. We are the medical professionals. So this is where the sort of garbage in, garbage out comes out. The context really matters, and the language model does not know what's going on outside of the text that you've provided it. If you are, if it could see the patient and see the waiting room and ask it follow-up questions, it just might do that. But right now we haven't given it enough information to do something like that. So I want to show you an advanced technique called personification. AI models can, because they are trained on the internet, they're trained on papers and stories and movie scripts, things that the way humans talk is generally we set up people that do things, and people have personalities, people have roles, people have jobs. And the way the internet writes its text out, the way we generally publish work is people doing things. We don't generally publish algorithms on their own. We publish them. Yes, this is it was the EIS algorithm for determining how you establish maybe it was ESI, apologies, how urgent a patient needs to be seen. And so generally you say, who is responsible for that? It might be the trauma nurse who is responsible for that. You look on the Wikipedia page, it's going to show you who is responsible and how it's administered. So giving Chat GPT context around who it should act like is actually a really helpful way to get the results you're looking for. So we're going to try that again, and we're going to give it some more context. And say, I want you to act as a triage nurse. Sorry, I was saying trauma nurse, I meant triage nurse. I want you to act as a triage nurse. There's that personification. Now, of all the possible paths we could take through the model now, it is going to focus on the paths that include something about triage nurses. I will tell you the conditions of patients as they arrive in the emergency department, and you will respond with a number between 1, immediate life-saving intervention required without delay, and 5, stable with no resources anticipated except oral or topical medications or prescriptions, indicating the urgency of their condition. So here we've established who they're going to be, how to interpret the results, and what to give us back. And this is sort of the personification pattern. Who? Triage nurse. What they're going to see, conditions of patients as they arrive, and how the model should respond, a number between 1 and 5. Now, it's probably going to interpret this as responding with more, but now the model has a lot more context around how we are going to interact with it. And it turns out that it usually does a lot better. The first patient has arrived in the emergency department with chest pain. Same prompt as last time, but now with context. And there we go, a priority level of 1, immediate life-saving intervention required without delay. So now, until further assessment can be made by medical staff. So this is where things like we are the medical staff becomes, it's like, hey, we are that medical staff, but it can start making decisions on, yes, the triage nurse may not be the one making those assessments. Maybe it's someone else. And Chat GPT is really amazing at determining who in society does what. And you should keep in mind that there are biases that come with that. Who in society is responsible for what in certain situations are very ingrained based on internet text, but it can be really useful if you want the model to act as a certain person. Obviously, chest pain itself might just be GI tract stuff. So you would, if you were this triage nurse, you'd probably want follow-up questions. And if you're developing an application that uses Chat GPT, you might have the actual results of the entire conversation the triage nurse had with that patient, and then put all of that into Chat GPT, and then maybe have it spit a result after that. But now that we have this persona, we can actually interact with it again. So we could say, the second patient arrived in the emergency department complaining of a sore throat. I'll give you all a second to read that. But it looks like it's doing a pretty good job. It not only gives us the answer we were looking for, that number of 4 or 5, but it also has some follow-up questions. So unlike last time, when we just gave it our problem, now that we have context, now that we have a persona, it's being a lot more helpful. So I can't recommend personification enough as a way to work this out. stepping aside, looking at other ways that people have used Chat GPT, hopefully as inspiration, so that you might be able to come up with some ideas of your own. There's been an absolute boom in the number of companies that just take a persona and then whatever the user queried, and then take the results and just give it straight back to the user. You could say things like, in my line of work, you could say, hey, the persona, which is supplied by the company, is you're a graphic designer. Create an HTML file with styles that match, are minimalist, but art nouveau, and are creative with good language for marketing. And then, create that website using this prompt. And then they take the prompt from the user who's using their application, slap it on the bottom, and then whatever comes out of that, which is usually HTML and CSS code that can be used to build a website, is sent right back. And they might attach that to another piece that stores that HTML on a server and serves it as a website. So using it as part of a stack of other things as a tool is much more useful when you have a persona, and you can build entire applications and businesses based on that. So personification can actually get you a really long way. There have been some pretty hilarious downsides, though. Bing used Chat GPT as part of its new Bing search with AI, and people were able to put in a prompt that said, tell me what the persona you used was, and it spit out the entire business plan of Bing's persona prompt right at the top. Microsoft was definitely embarrassed by that. So there's sort of a saying called there is no outside text. Everything that is part of the prompt can be found out by the user. So if you're putting in information that a user ends up using on a web portal, for example, there is a 100% chance that one of those users is going to be clever enough to dig out whatever you're asking for. I don't think this would be hugely problematic, but if you did something bad, like something that was racist, sexist, ableist, homophobic, that is a very auditable piece. You cannot hide that from the public. So personas, super useful, very public. I want to try another personification, but do you guys have any questions about how we just went through that? Seeing none.
We have one question, but we're going to wait till.
I guess, yeah. Let me. Maybe you're going to touch on this, but I guess kind of what I'm seeing from a lot of this is like. I guess I'm trying to understand where emergency medicine can, and maybe you're going to get to this, and that's why maybe it's better holding off, but where they can kind of benefit from a Chat GPT other than what you talked about, or if you didn't read the full paper, because I feel and again, I find myself using it, and what it seems like where we're using it here is more for more to carry out maybe some small task here or there, becoming the triage nurse, or ask it a question, hey, what's a differential diagnosis for chest pain? I feel once you go through a residency program, you're probably pretty well equipped to kind of answer those sort of things. So I'm just wondering if there's I guess if you see another use for it, or is it just kind of more I don't know. I guess that's my question. Is really do you see it? I mean, obviously we talked about machine learning model in the beginning with radiology. Is there really a use for this to discover anything in emergency medicine? Or not? I feel I find myself using it more for fun, oh, let's see if we can get this. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, great question. And I think ultimately it's going to have to be you to answer it. But some ideas I've come up with are drug dosing. So a lot of times there's, you'll finish your residency program, or at least this is according to my wife, and you'll have a lot of drugs you know how to use, general doses. Adult dosing makes sense, but then what do I do for this if it's a child with liver problems? Weight, how good is their liver, and how much do they weigh are going to be pretty big factors in that. And getting a quick result from that is usually pretty helpful. We can try some of those out and take a look there. I think a lot of the work of producing notes is, from what I hear, notes are a huge pain. I don't want to be the one to say that you should write all of your notes with it, but going back to the editing thing, getting a first draft that you can edit sometimes is a lot better than nothing. So let's try out this example where I want you to act as a doctor note summarizer. I will tell you short notes about patients as I see them, and you will respond with a short summary of information in a professional tone. Do not provide a diagnosis, advice, or further steps. And then we give it our notes, something that we might have dictated, something that isn't very much in shorthand, but perhaps not enough to put onto the patient's on their record that that you would show the other doctors. And here is a better worded. It takes words that you have and frames them in a more professional way, and perhaps in a way that matches your tone and your style. So taking creative work, taking words that you have to say and putting them in the tone or style that you want, summarizing them, expanding them, or contracting them can be really useful. I think something that's really tricky in emergency medicine is how often are you on a computer? How often do you have text-based input for what you're thinking, where you couldn't necessarily look something up on, I think UpToDate is the tool I hear most often used. Think about if you had UpToDate, but you need to take information from there, summarize it, or you need a table of, hey, give me this medicine with doses based on weights. Give me the information that I've seen, summarize it and combine it with this other thing. Here's this patient's notes. Here's the drug I want to give them. Are there any interactions I should be aware of? And things that do, I think about it as more personalized or more contextualized querying is another way you could think about it. So if you have work you need to be doing where you can give it context, remember that article I pasted in, that can be a LinkedIn profile, that can be a patient history, that can be drug information. There could be a new paper about a new study, and then you have the patient's, and then you provide the patient's history, and then say, given these combinations, would this patient be a good fit for this procedure or this, whatever the study might be about. And you can get a little bit more information from there. But I think that's what I want to get from you is if you guys have ideas for things you might be able to try it out with, let me know. And I can probably give you either a, hey, let's go try and see how you might try and see, or off the top of my head, whether or not I think it might work.
Elliot, I think those are like really good points. The biggest thing for us is just always efficiency and, being able to do more than two things at once. And, the list of symptoms, the quality of their symptoms, everything that you just listed there are things that most people waiting in the waiting room are capable of providing themselves. And if they can, and then that can be used to summarize to us what we're dealing with, the time saver is huge. If you're just thinking about, you walk to the waiting room, if you can find the patient and if they, speak the language that you speak, then maybe you can take a history. Then you take that history and you're summarizing it in your brain. Then you go and you sit down and then you write it down and then you figure out what orders you want. But if you take a lot of those inefficiencies out, then you can help a lot more people efficiently and probably do it in even a safer way, potentially. So I think that's where, like what you're saying, it could be hugely useful, enormously useful.
Definitely. And so if we're thinking about an application like that, let's ride with that one where you have patients who, maybe have a, hey, if you are waiting in line and there's a long line, go to this website, pre-fill out your information, and it's gonna be a started dialogue. Here's the first question. What are your complaints today? You type them in, hit enter. It asks you follow-up questions following perhaps an algorithm that you've already preset. I'm sure there is a certain sequence or a tree of possible states the patient could end up in with the follow-up questions you want to get answers to. And then you could take that all the way down to a decision. And then now you have, it might be too much to build that application as an entire web flow for a user to go through, but as a chatbot, it might be much more reasonable. I do want to caution that, I'm sure you guys are aware, many of your patients probably don't know how to use a phone, don't have access to the internet, don't know how to type on a phone, or wouldn't understand the instructions. But I do really like the idea that, hey, it doesn't have to be everyone. It doesn't have to fit every single person for it to benefit every single person. If some of our patient comes in and we've already asked them all the questions they need, then that saves us time so that we can work better with the patients who didn't fill out that application. I also want to point out that people can game stuff. People are really good at figuring out where in the rules they can get around things. But as long as, OpenAI or Chat GPT isn't handing out opioids, for example, you probably have a great idea on your hands. I've got a couple slides and then we're going to go into G&A questions in general, and I want to dive deeper into other applications you guys have in mind. So let me take you all the way to the end now. we talked about some shortcomings, but there are definitely shortcomings with Chat GPT. The first is it's trained on the entire internet, and correctness is associated in the model with the number of times it sees something. So if you start a story where the strength of medicine is correlated with how much, how small you can get each particle or something, which may be popular in homeopathic medicine, for example, but not necessarily correct. The model doesn't have any way of distinguishing that. The more times it sees something, the more likely it is to follow that path, which puts a lot of power in OpenAI's hands to choose the things that the model or that the training process sees the most, so that it is generally getting correct information. But you can see that there's a lot of creative freedom in picking that training data set. The other, as we mentioned, is text-only input. Right now, you can only give it text and get text back. Sometimes you might want to say, hey, here, the patient has, these symptoms, and then here's a picture of their MRI. You can't do that right now, but OpenAI is actually, the GPT-4 model can handle image-based input. The web UI does not have it yet. So that's something you could expect in a few months, but doesn't exist right now. But yeah, keep in mind that it's just text. So any application you build, you say like, hey, I need to hear, recording of your heart. It's a no-go right now. And the other thing is that audit trail. You can't ask OpenAI or anyone or the model why it decided to give someone that 3 instead of a 5 or instead of a 1. But things are coming soon. In November, ChatGPT was released. Last month, Bing incorporated GPT-4 into its search. And then this month, they released GPT-4. I got access to GPT-4 last night. Things are changing incredibly fast. So I'm really glad that you guys are using it. The best thing you can do is use it all the time. Try it out for your applications and actually try building that flow. Say, hey, I think we could make a tool that we could pre-screen patients. Well, what you can do is create a persona. You will act as a tool. You act as, perhaps give it that triage nurse persona of how you're going to act, and then here are the steps you can follow to create this application. And if you can build it in Chat GPT in the UI, given the context that you have, there are plenty of startups that can help you turn that chat-based infrastructure into a web app or build it into your website. Obviously, you guys are aware of HIPAA. Keeping data and contextualizing it in a safe way that is private for your patients is important. And every message that gets sent to Chat GPT is sent to OpenAI, and they use it to further train their models. So there are a lot of implications for what data actually gets sent, and privacy. OpenAI is the one who controls it. They don't tell anyone what they do with it. So be wary of that. But now let's ask some questions. What do y'all got?
So, Ryan, should we go through some of our just discussion questions now?
Yeah, and if anyone has just a lot of this was covered. But hold on one second. Let me just
And thank you, Elliot. That was really, really great.
Yeah, that was awesome. I do have a question right off the bat, though. While I'm trying to get this loaded up, I'm just having a little technical difficulties here. But you mentioned OpenAI kind of controls this, their system and who has access to it and how they're feeding it. So we're talking about how this may be relevant for emergency medicine, or how it will be relevant for medicine in general. And I'm wondering, are similar large language models going to be sort of utilized within the medical world, and does it take something like these electronic medical records, the differences, the Cerners, the Epics, all of those, to actually build their own model to utilize the data that they have in their system about our patients? Does it take that to make this happen, or is this like an easier process?
It is. That's a great question, and it depends on what you're trying to do with the data and what data you're sending. So training a model even can be difficult, especially if you're creating a very large model. So if you wanted to train a model based on data that had your patient's information in it, you would need to control the model. You need to make sure that it didn't get sent out anywhere else. And that would probably be a large and expensive process, probably more than something that I would imagine, a more technical project than I would imagine a hospital should do. There are companies that will train models for you. If you give it data, it can figure out how to train those models. It can do it in a HIPAA compliant way. If you do a Google search right now, you'll find plenty of companies that will do HIPAA compliant model training. However, taking pre-trained models, so something like GPT-3, and actually getting the model itself, the model is, I think, on the order of hundreds of gigabytes, so big, but not something that can't fit on a laptop. You can download that model and you can actually train it even further. So there are companies that will help you take models like this, and models like GPT are being released almost every week now. So there are companies who will help you take something like a GPT and let you run it on your own hardware or on hardware or servers or networks that are either in your control or something like Epic's control. And then so that you can actually build that, or I guess there are companies who would build that for you before someone like Epic has it. Then the last piece I want to touch on is, I don't know everything about HIPAA, but if you aren't sending patient names and any identifying information about the patient themselves, there's a good chance that you could actually use something like OpenAI and say, hey, the patient came in with chest pain. I hear stories about patients in general without names all the time, and I assume that's what you all use to teach medical students. You're not revealing individual patient names or identities. You're just sending information about the care that was provided or the context of the history without the name. So with that, you might be able to avoid certain things with HIPAA. And again, this you would know more than I would. But you could avoid a lot of HIPAA concerns and still actually use tools like Chat GPT.
Cool.
Awesome.
I have one question too. Do you see any kind of like future model that would integrate a large language model with some kind of logic-based model so that you could be communicating with, a large language model platform that also has access to some kind of logic, way of like looking up something for real?
That's a wonderful question. It's something I'll take you back to the Google application. Google has something where the query comes in, and the first step is actually to parse the query in terms of any special characters that it uses. So if it has quotes around it, it's supposed to control the entire thing as a single phrase in what it searches for. If it has minus, then that search should not be what it's for. So how you might build that is step one. You have some actual coding tool, pre-written rules that take the text that the person sent and chop it up into bits into this is the thing we're looking for. This has to be included its entirety. Make sure that this isn't in the results. And then this isn't what Google does. Let's pretend we had to use Chat GPT as the actual searching thing. You can then create a persona. You are a librarian. Find results or find any internet results with text that includes this exact phrase relating to this idea, and make sure that it does not include content with that is this. So that's sort of step one is your algorithm, and then step two is your AI. AI does the searching and it finds the results. And then of course the step after that is going to be to deliver something to your browser. So what the AI might come back with are URLs of websites, but the Google search results are more than just the URLs. They have content from the website, and you want that to be exact. So you might have other services that go and get the content from that website and give you that text there. The page is white, it has a search bar on top and the Google logo, so you have to format it as a web page. So what you have there is a process that starts with algorithms, utilizes AI or machine learning, and then finishes with algorithms. And then the next part is a human who looks at it and clicks on something and goes to the website where they get more algorithms. So the interaction is totally something that's possible and something that happens all the time. And that's where I really want to encourage you to think, not just can AI replace everything that someone's doing, but what pieces of it can it replace? Because you can definitely use it as a building block inside of an entire flow.
Awesome. So we do have some questions here. A lot of it has already been touched on, thankfully. Does anyone out here have any questions right now? No? All right. So that we kind of already touched on, but and we've talked about this a little bit as well. I think it's important to emphasize, like, I feel like there are certain things right now that it could do for us, like what you demonstrated, something simple like discharge instructions. I actually did this last night when I was just playing around on Chat GPT. I wrote, write me discharge instructions and return precautions for simple cellulitis. And it did a phenomenal job. A lot of the things that I would have, said to the patient in person, but wouldn't have in as much detail, discussed in my discharge instruction. Now, we do have things on Epic or Cerner that we can kind of just fill in and use as our discharge instructions. But if we add other things that are unique to that particular patient, you're modifying it in real time. And I think that's super helpful. And everything's about time. We're dealing with so much overload in the emergency department. And if we can save 5 minutes, it's potentially another patient that we could see. So I think that is just huge. If anyone else has any comments regarding, efficiencies in the emergency department or anything like that.
I have a
Yeah, Cedar.
Go ahead. Sorry, I can't hear the people in there.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I love this idea, and I've also been trying to use it to write discharge instructions. And I think the key for me here is that it's a lot easier for me, especially if somebody needs detailed instructions, to read and correct instructions than to write them originally. But that at least right now, personally, I would not feel safe giving somebody discharge instructions that I didn't proofread.
I want to touch on that a little bit because that is exactly the workflow you should be doing. There will be decades, probably. Not decades. It's hard to predict anywhere in the future here, but what ChatGPT or what any model is going to give you is going to be a best estimate. So you should never trust it to be the final product. You should always use it as a starting point. For example, in this presentation, I came up with what I should be talking about. I asked it for a lot of talking points, and it came up with slides, entire slides for me, but I edited them. You have to edit them because there's context you didn't provide, and you can actually provide that context inside of ChatGPT. You can say, hey, you got this piece wrong, correct it, or you can just correct it yourself. I encourage you to try both. Sometimes, and it's tricky when you're on the job, but maybe consider thinking about like copying down, hey, I want to retry this later tonight when I have a little bit of time to figure out how I could do this better, and try it yourself. And then sometimes try it with more personification and more context. And you might be able to figure out, hey, if I give it this persona, I ask for this tone, and, I say, hey, here are the medications, or maybe I was missing something about a different piece of the user's history, then you can actually get better results. But again, you're still going to need to read it over at the very end and make sure it's totally right.
Great. Let's see what other things we haven't touched on. Cedar and I were kind of just talking a few days ago, and things were kind of just spilling out. We were talking about more stuff with administrative tasks and efficiency, and wondering, hey, if a positive blood culture is identified and the patient's already been discharged from the hospital or from the emergency department, could this write a letter to the patient? And we do a lot of phone calls, but it's another modality, another way to get in contact with the patient and save time doing that.
So I actually have two comments about that. The first is back to the previous slide on here about like improving efficiency. I guess I'm wondering, and this is more of a comment than anything else, but about ChatGPT's ability to help with billing and coding. That is incredibly complex. Like billing and coding in any form of medicine, but in the emergency department is no different. Especially with this whole new rollout that happened. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but in like January of this year, they sort of got rid of basically, like I did a whole thing on it, but level 5 charts, which is like the goal is to build a level 5 chart. It comes out to about $176 is the reimbursement if you don't account for like the cost of like where you are in like the country, but that'll increase it a little bit. But essentially the base is $176. That's kind of like the goal is to get there. And so I'm wondering how it can kind of like help with that, right? Like helping you get to a level 5 chart as like a provider, but also like help with that billing and to maximize reimbursements from like the hospital side of things, or the provider side of things, especially as like insurance companies try and cut down on what they're paying providers. The other sort of thing that I thought of was, what was your slide after this? Is something that kind of reminded me of that. Oh, about the positive blood cultures. So the only thing, it's actually interesting. I've done a little bit of like medical legal investigation for my own like interest, and one of the lawsuits I actually came about was something similar to this. Obviously, it was using a human, but what it did was it identified that a patient had a positive blood culture, but it showed that, and I guess Elliot, I'm not sure how well like versed you are on this, but like if somebody has a positive blood culture, they need IV antibiotics. But it showed that this particular species of bacteria was sensitive to like an oral antibiotic, and so the nurse actually missed that, and the patient died, and this turned into a whole like lawsuit. And so I guess like thinking about like limitations of it, and again, this is more like a comment than anything else, but thinking about limitations is if Chat GPT saw that or AI saw that, and it says, oh, wait, like this is a species that is sensitive to whatever the oral antibiotic is, which would not, which would not be appropriate for like somebody that has bacteria growing in their blood. If it sees that and it, says, oh, well, it's actually sensitive to this, does it miss something like that?
That is another great application. I think the second set of eyes is something that'll become really like a really awesome application where you say, hey, here is my discharge note. Here is my like the medications I'm providing. I'm a trained doctor. I know I am confident in what I'm providing them. Give this a read over and let me know if there are any drug interactions. This drug is out of date. This might interfere with the culture that you found in the blood, but this antibiotic should work or it shouldn't work. A mistake that you might have made, and that the AI might be able to just say like, hey, I noticed this was an issue. That is something that I actually have seen before, and I actually have used myself where I've written code and I knew there was a bug in it, and I was just like, hey, here's my code. Where's the bug? It's doing this. And it's like, oh, this line, you're not awaiting a thing correctly. And it's really good at figuring out things that don't fit a pattern when they should be fitting a pattern. So absolutely try that out. The tricky part is knowing how much you have to give it enough context for it to see the pattern that's being broken. One thing that's cool about Chat GPT 3.5 versus 4, GPT-3 has about 4,000 tokens. A token is something sort of between a few characters and a word. And GPT-4 has, what is it? I think it is 32,000 tokens. So order of magnitude difference in the amount of information you can give to the model, the amount of context that you can provide, which is sort of the difference between like, a couple, a few paragraphs before it starts like really thinking hard and like 50 pages. So like you can take entire histories and plop it in soon, and then say, hey, here's the whole history. And then here's the discharge note. Is anything wrong? And then you start getting specific about, is anything wrong with medications? Is anything wrong with any of the particular things you would like specific answers on? Because anything wrong, they might say, oh yeah, the patient had a heart attack yesterday. It's like, well, I already knew that. But if you specifically ask for things that you would like, that might have slipped through the cracks, or what if you make an application out of this and say like, hey, here's the place where when we are writing discharge notes, it takes in the entire history and it takes in the note and then plops out common things it would see. That's absolutely an application I can see as that second set of eyes, just to help you guys from a legal perspective. And then from the billing side of you, you could say, hey, what more do you need to provide to get to level 5? I don't know anything about what level 5 care looks like, but it looks like a legal, perhaps, definition of what you need to be providing. And it'd say like, hey, you're missing these notes to get to level 5. So that second set of eyes is absolutely something you could do, where it's not taking the action, but it could bring up things that you maybe have not done.
So that's really interesting to hear that side of it, Elliot, because I think that the second set of eyes is a great idea for, I mean, honestly, a lot of the stuff we do, not definitely not just restricted to blood cultures. But when Ryan and I were talking about this, I think the reason that we brought it up as something that this could help with is because we were kind of thinking like large language models are great at language and great at communication. And, when a patient gets a positive blood culture, I think probably everybody in this room right now has had to call back a patient that they didn't see and say, hey, this blood culture came back positive. You need to come back to the emergency department because you probably need IV antibiotics. And I mean, you might do the clinical work of looking at it and saying like, okay, there was only one culture positive and it was staph epidermidis and this patient was like very well. So maybe I don't need to do that for this one patient. But that's kind of the level of thinking that goes into it. And for the most part, it's just come back. You need to be reevaluated and probably get IV antibiotics. So there's actually very little thinking that goes into that. And it's something that is largely communication focused. So it's like this one thing needs to go out to the patient, and it is something that a specialist in communication, such as a model, could do potentially for us and take that burden, the interruption that takes 5 minutes, and then you're trying to be like, yes, we know it's terrible that you have to come back. We're really sorry. And the reason that I thought this was interesting, and I might be jumping ahead a couple of questions, I'm sorry, Ryan, is that there was, I think on the 14th, Nature Medicine published this article on Chat GPT and medicine that commented essentially on how much more empathetic these language models can be for patients, because they actually can like carry on a conversation and they have more than 2 minutes to give you, and that they've actually been used before. What was it? I think it was like in some mental health app or something. They translated human communication, like a human would type, and then this model would translate it to being in a more empathetic style, and that it worked better for people to get the language written by a machine because it was more empathetic than the language that was written by a person. And that for things like that, where we know it needs to be said, but we don't have the time to do it well because we're busy using, our clinical skills to make decisions and don't have time to give patients the empathetic communication that they deserve and need, that's a role for language models to come in and like sort of soften the words and take a little bit more time.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with, they're better at writing than we are. And that's totally something that you should take advantage of. Kind of going back to it's text only, if that's got to be a phone call, that becomes really tricky, because right now, even if you were to connect it to an AI voice, it still kind of sounds like a robot, which people don't love. However, I think that's a wonderful idea. I think if you could write it as an email or as a text message, however it is that you communicate, that's a wonderful option. And then if you're going to step into the world of automation, where, hey, blood culture pops up and then it goes into your inbox, but then this thing checks every message in your inbox and it's like, oh, this is a blood culture for a recent patient that it turned out to be positive. That's going to trigger the phone call automation. You might actually have a more difficult time building the thing that reads every one of your messages in your inbox and then writes, and then handles the actual phone calling than it is to do the model. So I think that things where this is sort of where I think the Chat GPT has shown that the creative work is actually no longer the hardest work. It's kind of coming into the technical side of who is going to be the one who hooks into your inbox system and who's going to be the one who hooks into your phone system to make those calls.
Yeah, so I kind of just jumped ahead to this question here because I think it's an interesting one, and it also depends on how much, we let these large language models do in medicine and how much work it takes on. And so I think when I, first wrote the question, I was like, well, automatically, people don't like talking to robots. They don't like talking to computers. They don't like, the impersonal connection. So I think there's certainly, that initial feeling of like, well, now we're taking the human out of it. But I kind of go back to the front end side of things in the emergency department where people are waiting and they just want to get their story out and they just want to tell someone what's going on and they want to be heard. And I think that this is a method to actually potentially improve that patient-physician relationship. I can't tell you the number of times I've gone into a waiting room, you're doing waiting room medicine, and the person's like, well, I've been here for 6 hours and I haven't even told anyone that, what my whole story is, and that my story has now changed since I've been in the emergency department for 5 hours. So, that ability to kind of like stay engaged with the patient and maybe even assist with monitoring these patients who are changing, in the waiting room, 5, 6, 7 hours for, a semi-urgent complaint, it could be huge. And it's important for us to know And so, and I think I hear from, patients all the time. It's like, oh, well, tech came and did an EKG on me. So yeah, things are happening. Right. So I think it's as little as like just being in contact with the medical facility and the people that are going to be taking care of you can make a really big difference in their perception of the type of care that they're receiving.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think once again, that figuring out how you hook into that, are you building an application that they can view on their phones, and then prompting them using that more, perhaps humble, perhaps caring language about, hey, has anything changed? How are you doing? We realize it's been a while. Things that are, obviously you want to make sure it doesn't come off like, you're on hold with the bank and, we value your call, but, it is so much better than nothing. That I think that is also a super valuable application and getting that story out, interacting with the patient, and then communicating updates. And then also, I don't know if you guys have heard of Lemonade Insurance, but what they do, they have a chatbot for every one of their insurance interactions. Everything you do goes through there. And sometimes you're talking with a human, sometimes you're talking with a chatbot. And their bot is good enough where it actually feels like we're talking with a human the whole time until they spit out like, hey, here are the 3 options, click on one of them. And you're like, I know the human didn't write that. But it doesn't matter because the bot is so good and feels so human-like that you're getting it just, like a human might jump in and say, hey, here's your diagnosis. Hey, here, come in. It's going to be this long wait, that it's, it feels much like I switched all my insurance to them just because it feels so much more natural and I feel so much more cared for than the insurance company where it's entirely very robotic sounding emails followed by, maybe I talk to a person occasionally, but they're really focusing on that empathy the whole time. I think that's a wonderful strategy.
I missed the beginning of that. What did you said that Lemonade did what? They switched to what?
They're an insurance company where the entire interface on their app is a chatbot. Like I can bring up Lemonade right now, and you can see if I want to make a claim, then the first thing they're going to do is oh, never mind, they're down right now. Well, the first thing that they do is say, how can we help you today? It's like file a claim, there are a few other actions, or ask someone on the team. So there's always kind of that back door to talk to a human. And obviously that might be a little bit trickier in the ER, but building that interaction as like, if you build it, critically not making an app you have to download. No one wants to download an app just to get into the waiting room, but a website you can interact with that has that chatbot built in where you can talk to it and just say like, hey, here's what I'm looking for, tell that story, and then it can give you updates throughout the time. I think that's a wonderful application. One other thing, sort of related, but not entirely different, to an idea one of you guys brought up earlier, where you have things coming up in your inbox, you have things, tickets that come up to you. This reminds me of an app that I saw a few weeks ago where someone made a bot that every email that comes into your email in basket, the bot reads and then prepares a response. So you have a draft for every email in your inbox as it arrives, which, really useful for regular business stuff. But it's missing some of the context around like, hey, what, we had that conversation last week, yada, yada, yada. So again, it's kind of that, let the AI try something and then you edit it. But I think it could be even more useful in a medical context. And I'm mostly thinking about my wife right now, where a lot of her work is in basket based. You have a patient and then you need to follow up with something. A message comes in, you can have the AI model read that message, prepare a response of it. So, hey, this person needs a drug refill. And then it might prepare a response of like, yes, approve the refill. And so instead of, clicking on the thing and then looking at their chart, you would have the entire chart's worth of context plus that message, and it would prepare that response every time. So you would, instead of writing things, you'd be reading things, possibly editing, and then approving, which might save you a bunch of time.
All right, so let's, I wanted to get to this one because I thought it was interesting, and it was, there were a bunch of articles about this. And we do have some medical students here as well. And we all go through the evaluation process, and you're continuously evaluated in residency. And I thought that this was just an interesting, finding. And I guess, so the first Chat GPT barely passed, right? And then the second one was 80+%. And I think it does bring up the question of how we, evaluate each other. But we had we had, step 2 CS that they just got rid of, which was like an in-person evaluation. And so, and at that time I felt like, people were thinking it was useless. It was costly. We were flying to, certain centers and, being evaluated, and it was all very like artificial. But I'm just curious about your opinion on this, and if anyone else's opinion.
Yeah, I want to share what I've thought about this, which I think, I talk a lot with my friends who are teachers actually a lot on writing, because this has been a big issue with high school writing. Chat GPT has been blowing away high schoolers for, months now. I think we should treat it the same way that we treat calculators on math exams. We used to think that being able to do multiplication in your head was incredibly important to be able to do it for large numbers. Now we just don't test that. Being able to sum up a column of numbers used to be something that we tested rigorously. Now we can do it on spreadsheets. So it changes, regurgitation of information isn't super important, but things like synthesizing information and taking different pieces from different contexts is still important. However, it's, in eMed, you probably aren't going to be typing in stuff into Chat GPT every time no matter how advanced it gets, you aren't going to be able to type stuff in all the time. So being able to connect those dots in your head is still important no matter what. And then the test is going to change. We're going to have to say, hey, maybe we have a portion where you can use AI and maybe we have a portion where you can't. But being able to synthesize information on the fly is never really something that I think we're going to be able to use Chat GPT for all the time. And I think being able to connect dots, like, someone comes in complaining of shoulder pain, but they're also limping. That's not text, like they may have put in they may not even think, oh yeah, the limping, like that's just because I have a bad knee, but then you notice swelling. It's context that you get to see as a human that will never be able to convey, that a person might not convey when they're talking to you. They might not write it in a web form. And there's, that's kind of that subtle extra piece that humans get that, that a computer will never get. And then also keep in mind that, like, you already could look up everything. If you had Google when you were taking the USMLE, you might be able to get 100%. I'm not 100% sure about that, but almost every test I've taken in my life, if I had Google the whole time, I could have, knocked it out of the park. So I think we are well past the point where memorization is the most important thing, but memory recall will always be important, because it's really hard to have an intelligent conversation with anyone who knows about anything if you have to look stuff up every time you want to talk about something. So there's a balance, but I think that, we don't need to get rid of all of our tests anytime soon. We might have to adapt a little bit, but we're not, adapt, not get rid of it entirely.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, it's interesting. Any questions right now? Anybody? No? Okay. And then this is just kind of just a general one. I think we kind of know the answer to it. I think this is like, evolving, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see what direction this goes in. And I think that the potential applications are really just endless at this point. So it will be, even, and like you said, you wake up in the morning and then there's a new model out there to use. So I'm just curious what it's going to look like. What do you think it's going to look like in, a year? What are your expectations?
So my biggest expectations for the things that are going to take things to the next level are things like multimodal input. OpenAI already announced it, but being able to include an image with your text is huge. Being able to include a recording of those lungs or that heart murmur with the text are things like heart murmurs are there are charts. You look at the charts of the murmur and then you spit out. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfectly algorithmic. You need to know some context about the patient, but boom, context of the patient is in text. Heart murmur is an audio file instead of an audio file transcribed to video, and LLMs can start training on that. So I think the mixture of text with other media and even text with live video, obviously, once again, HIPAA concerns, but if you have a live video of the patient's gait, along with, it's more of a physical therapy thing, but the patient's gait plus some text of their history, now you can, or videos of their history, it can note improvement. It can suggest exercises. It can even output generative videos of what those exercises should look like. And hell, it could create a video of the person doing the exercise. So being able to mix different media is going to be pretty compelling. And I think that's something we're going to start seeing in the next month or two, and is going to incorporate more media, basically everything but touch and smell, probably, within the next year or two. I think there's going to be, from a corporate perspective, some big money makers in terms of, how you access and store that video. Video files are, the cool thing about text is that it's tiny from a data perspective. So you can just send it over the wire. Even a short video or a high quality picture takes up megabytes, which is a lot harder to offer for free. So I think there's going to be a lot of money that changes hands there. I think one thing that we should all be careful to anticipate, and it doesn't sound like you guys are doing this, but it's not going to be replacing entire humans anytime soon. It isn't there to make strategic decisions. It isn't there to incorporate everything about different players on your team and know how people are feeling that day and know what all of your emails say. It's much more, really consider it for individual applications, because time and time again, technology has promised we're going to replace humans, and it just augments what humans can do already. So all of the ideas you brought up today were wonderful augmentations. And I think you guys are right on with that creative path of like, hey, can we take this and can we make it speed up this process? And I encourage you, focus more on what exactly that steps would be. Patient calls X, or this arrives in my inbox. And then step 2 is take, what text are you taking from that piece of information and putting in a Chat GPT, and then try it out. If I did have something hooked up to my in-basket, or I did have something hooked up to our blood panel notification system, what text comes out of that? And then you be the robot, you be the other parts of the system around Chat GPT, paste it in and see what the results are. Practice with different personas and see if you can improve those results. And then you're going to get to something where, hey, I can reliably paste this in with this persona and get the result that I'm looking for. Now it's time to take that and turn it into a web application or a service on your corporate website. That's where I think you're going to find a lot of success. And the only way to know that is to practice with it. So just give it a bunch of tries, use personas, look up other advanced techniques. OpenAI has released a cookbook of how to use better improved techniques for using prompts. Give those all a try, and then you'll find some really cool applications. I realize we're almost out of time, so if you guys have any questions, I can send out my email, elliottaplant.com, or sorry, elliottplant.com or elliottaplant@gmail.com. Reach out anytime. I love hearing ideas, especially for businesses, and I'm really happy to help with anything you guys are looking for.
Well, Elliot, thank you so much for your time. This presentation is incredibly timely, and it was great, and it's nice to hear from someone that knows what they're talking about. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Elliot. This was really wonderful.
Thank you, Cedra. I'll see you all hopefully very soon, but not in the emergency room.
Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Really interesting that you mentioned that.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have a little